Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We have a great show for you. In simple terms, we're going to talk about more. This is America, right? We want more Cadillacs, more Camaros, and more Corvettes. Many of them electric, apparently. So says a number of rumors that are floating around the internet. We have our own reporting on that. Definitely check it out. That's kind of the headliner right here. We'll talk about what we've been driving. I've been in our long-term 330E. I just plugged it in. And Jeremy Korzeniewski, our senior editor for all things consumer, has been driving a Lexus GX 460. With that, I will welcome him in. What's going on, man?
You know, not a whole lot is going on. We've hit the time of the year where almost every day in central Ohio is dreary and chilly and damp. So spending a lot of time indoors.
I hear you. I just walked the dog. And it's funny when you actually like kind of get out and move, it just feels a little less sort of overcast and gray.
It
like
helps.
Sitting here looking at like the outside, it's just like, But once you're moving, you're like, okay, this is better. So, shout out to Blue the dog. She needs her walk. Golden Retriever co-host definitely helps. So with that, let's talk about these rumors out of General Motors. We've been hearing this kind of take shape over the last few weeks. I mean, really few years, if you think about it. The reports that have sort of really reignited the conversation come actually from Car Driver. We've, of course, kind of picked up on that, added our own analysis on our site. The reporter, George Cocker, here's a little bit of trivia. I used to be his editor at Automobile Magazine about 10 years ago. One of many editors, but I put together the news section there for a minute. And part of my job was to edit his copy.
Mm-hmm.
So he's still doing this sort of thing. He's like an industry sleuth is what...
Been around for a long time.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, but let's just kind of break this down. We're talking about basically three different sort of sub-brands: a Corvette sub-brand, a Camaro sub-brand, and an Escalade sub-brand. In simple terms, we're looking at a four-door Corvette with potentially an SUV that's called Brawny. And this would be like an Ultium-based sort of expansion. Then we've got a Camaro, which would be like an electric 2+2 plus a crossover, plus, and I quote, a mid-priced flagship sports car loosely linked to the Corvette. To me, I just say WTF, right? And then you've got the Escalade, which would include perhaps a minivan for China and a 7-seater to also grow the brand, which to me sounds a lot like the current XT6. So a lot to unpack here. I think there's a lot of pros and cons for if and how they could do this. Mark Royce, president of General Motors, sort of said something like this about the about the Corvette in an investor call recently. He's sort of like their car guy in chief too. He really kind of takes a close look at all the products and, a little bit like a successor to Bob Lutz in some ways. So he obviously, is very invested in like the Corvette and the Camaro in particular. Why don't we start with Corvette? Because this is sort of like the least unexpected news, if you will. Like we've already seen like the E-Ray, the Zora, whatever it ends up kind of landing as out there. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think we need to take, we're automotive enthusiasts. Like if there's anyone, and if you're listening to this, you probably are a lot like us. If there's anyone who is going to be outraged over the idea of taking a storied nameplate and turning it into something, unrecognizable, based on that nameplate's history, we're the people, and if you're listening, you're the people who are going to like take a second glance at this and say like, well, what? Why are they doing that? What is that all about? The vast majority of people it's going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, there's a electric 4-door Mustang now. Well, that's interesting. I bet it's pretty quick. That's how the majority of people are going to look at news like this. To us, it's a really big deal because Corvette is like America's sports car, all the way back from 1953 straight on through. Like it's gotten more and more performance oriented. It started out as like a kind of a boulevard cruiser, then it turned into a muscle car, and then it turned into, something they were trying to win races with, which evolved into, a world-class rival to, Ferraris and Lamborghinis and Porsches that are much, much more expensive. So when you look at Corvette as a nameplate all the way back to the 50s till now, it's evolved quite a bit into what we currently think of as like the American icon. Also, so my point being there is it's evolved to this. It can continue evolving. I think as long as there is now mid-engine, world-class, iconic American sports car called the Corvette something, we should be happy about that. We should be very pleased. The fact that the brand is so recognizable and well known that they can turn it into something significantly larger than it currently is brilliant, smart marketing. That's what you do when you get a big hit. That's what Ford did with the Mustang. I mean, look at we all got up in arms at the Chevy Blazer when they came out with this crossover Blazer as opposed to a body on frame, full size truck based utility vehicle. Now no one cares and it doesn't matter. We see these Blazers and we're like, yeah, that's actually a handsome crossover, So if they're going to expand Corvette, as long as they don't go, crazy with it and, slap a Corvette badge on, a little silly pickup truck or something, or a family hauling crossover, if they don't do something, too crazy with it, I think we just have to let be what's going to be. They're going to probably make this like the range topping, like the performance oriented models. They're going to have a Corvette badge, but they're still going to be that quintessential Corvette. That being the case, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I tend to think growing the Corvette lineup is actually okay. I think, for me, it becomes more like, what are these vehicles going to be? Are they going to be good? Are we going to like them? And then, the pro is, more Corvettes. The argument against is, do you start to water things down? What is Chevy if Corvette has like 2 or 3 cars? What is, how does it, sort of compare against perhaps like the Camaro, which we're going to talk about a little bit here? How does it match up against some of the other vehicles within the Chevy lineup and across the General Motors lineup? But I think, especially with Corvette, I think they'd be pretty precise about it. And I think they could pull it off. I mean, I'm curious, in the report, they're talking about a brawny SUV. I wonder what that means. I don't think it means like a Cadillac Yukon. You know what I mean? I think it means something that's probably very powerful and perhaps like in your face stylish.
Sure. I mean, in the age where we're seeing Ferrari SUVs and Lotus SUVs, and I mean, how many decades has it been since Porsche branched out into SUVs, sport utility vehicles? And now, they've got 4-door sedans and electric cars, and they all wear the same Porsche badge, but they're still the 911. Like, you want that historically excellent range topping Porsche 911. Yeah, that's still there. But there's also a Cayenne, and they've gone racing in the Trans-Siberian, rally with Cayennes. And, if as long as companies do things right, I think, it's a name, it's a brand position. It's a lot of it is about marketing. And, if they make a Corvette sedan that has like amazing performance and, it rivals some of the Ferrari made hatchbacks, think back, like a lot of where like the world's most iconic brands have made, go all the way back to Lamborghini, like the LM002 was, it was like a military vehicle that they eventually turned into a, civilian model. And now, like, can you imagine what, hardcore Lamborghini aficionados were like at the past? Like, what the heck is this? But now we look back at it and we're like, man, that thing is so cool. I'd love to see that parked next to a Countach in someone's garage. So I think we just got to go with the flow when it comes to these things. I think electrification is key because the way that electric motors and high output batteries work, you can capture just amazing performance specifications out of a vehicle to the kind of performance expectations that someone who sees, Corvette or the little cross flag symbol or something sitting on it, they're going to be like, yeah, okay, well, this is the new Corvette, sedan or crossover or whatever it is. I think they have to maintain what people expect out of it. And as long as they hit those measurements and, like driving feel, then I think it's, we're still going to wake up the next day and we're all going to be fine.
Ultium based 2025 is the timeline we're looking at. I think it's just, this is sort of an overarching theme for these other two vehicles. I think something badged Corvette, even if it like sort of parasitically, like leeches onto the Corvette a little bit, is going to, in the long run, pay off more for Chevy and General Motors than perhaps maybe another Malibu or something.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's how you got to look at the net positive.
Yeah. The Escalade actually is super interesting to me, turning Escalade into a brand. I have been saying, I don't remember the last time I brought up on the first time I brought up on the podcast, probably, 5 years ago. I said, why aren't there 3 Escalades? Why aren't there Escalades in every size class? They print money for GM. People, they're status symbols. People like them. People buy them. The latest Escalade is a great vehicle too. You get inside, you've got that curved OLED screen. You've got, very powerful drivetrain, especially, now they've got an Escalade V. I don't know why you wouldn't, like, when you find, as a company with shareholders, when you find something that resonates with the buying public, you should capitalize on that. There should be a small compact Escalade. There should be a mid-side Escalade, and then there should be the big full flat Escalade. They really should have done this a long time ago. Now, this report that we saw online that we're talking about also says something about an Escalade minivan. We have to keep in mind that that's not something that they're talking about for the United States. There's not going to be a Cadillac Escalade. Well, if there is, I'd be shocked. There's a Cadillac Escalade minivan in Cadillac dealerships in the United States. But minivans are still popular in a lot of parts of the world. Lexus makes a minivan that is a really luxurious version of a Toyota product. And if GM wants to take their high-end Buick minivan, whatever it is, GL8 or whatever they call it now, and they want to put a bigger chrome front end on it and they want to sell it in Chinese dealerships to Cadillac buyers, that's also fine. I don't think we should like raise our eyelids or our eyebrows too much at reports like this. I think if you have your typical, Lexus RX buyer, and they found out that, in China, you can buy this Lexus minivan that looks like really garish and it's kind of crazy. They'd be like, well, that's weird, but they don't even have to know that that's a thing. We know we're automotive enthusiasts. We do this every single day. And like, it's a major part of our lives and our conversations. But yeah, I think Escalade should have happened a long time ago. I think if I were giving them product advice, I'd keep Escalade, more along the utility vehicle line. But we'll see how it all plays out.
Agreed. And I actually forgot that you did mention that on the podcast a while ago, and it makes a ton of sense. I don't want to add too much here because I think you really said it perfectly. I think a couple like things I think here though is, Cadillac has at times been weak in, a lot of areas, but across its sort of crossover lineup in every area but the Escalade. So what's a good way to remedy that? Make more Escalades. Then you don't have as much sort of dissonance when you're looking at some of the other like XT vehicles that have, generally they look good, but it seems like overall we tend to find they're kind of somewhere in the middle. Like maybe some of them sell okay, some of them aren't as like fun to drive. Like it's kind of like a up and down experience that they're like smaller crossovers of the last 40 years. The other thing too, Escalade has the least amount of history, if you will. It's only been around since the 90s. So I don't think people would get crazy fired up about adding another SUV to something that is an SUV. Plus, when you look at it, Ford has done this with the Bronco. I'm sure there's other examples that aren't coming to mind right away, but I think this is just a natural, almost like you're wrong if you don't do this, to be honest. I think there's potentially some issues with the Camaro and the Corvette, but I don't really see a big downside here.
Well, I mean, think of Jeep. The Jeep brand started in very minimalist, utilitarian, military, that was the aspect. That's what Jeep was. And then, when they realized that they could make a CJ, a civilian Jeep, and sell it to farmers that needed an implement, that became popular because they were durable, go anywhere. And then, the marketing heads had a whole bunch of really bright ideas, and they turned Jeep into an entire brand. They're still a Wrangler. They're still the one that everyone thinks of when you think Jeep. You think the Jeep Wrangler. And it's, the inherent goodness of that, 4-wheel drive, top off, go anywhere kind of mentality rubs off on the other products. And now you just expect, well, as long as the Jeep offers the best off-road capabilities in every segment that it plays in, then that's what Jeep means. But it didn't used to mean that. It used to mean military, and then it meant super utilitarian. And then, they just kept getting, bigger and bigger and more luxurious and leather lined, and people liked it and they kept buying it. And, we got Grand Wagoneers, and then we got, Cherokees, and we got Grand Cherokees, and now we've got Wagoneers again. And don't forget, they still make smaller vehicles like the Renegade. They play in those segments, but that doesn't diminish what a Wrangler is. And the Bronco Sport is a really nice product in the segment that it plays in. It has like the things that it has to have to wear a Bronco nameplate, but then it's got the big Bronco. And when you say like, oh, I went off-roading in this Bronco Raptor and it was amazing, no one's like, well, it's not a real Bronco because they make a Bronco Sport too. I mean, no one cares, and that's wrong. Certain diehard, enthusiasts care, but the majority of people, it's just, it is what it is. And, that's kind of how the world works.
Counter argument to that is the Wrangler is still the Wrangler. They just made more Jeeps. The 911 is still the 911. They just made more Porsches. In this case, you're talking about taking the Halo and making more of that in something different. So that's more Corvettes, more Camaros, and more Escalades. Like I said, the Escalade, I don't think people get upset about more Escalades. I do think there will be some people, perhaps the diehards, that get upset about say a Corvette liftback crossover type thing. I'm not really one of those, to be honest, especially if they do something that is, some of Cocker's reporting is it might be like a Taycan fighter, which, perfectly honest, you could also call that a 911 liftback. I mean, just if you look at the style on it, I mean, that thing could pass as a 4-door 911. So, I mean, at some point, I think there's going to be about 25 to 30% of the base that really gets burned up about it. And I think that's, in this case, like collateral damage, as they try to grow and sell more cars and make more money.
Well, one thing that we haven't really touched on too much in this conversation is it's all about the execution, right?
Yes.
Cadillac killed themselves with crappy cars in the 1980s and 1990s. And every time, for every Cimarron or Catera, as long as they have, an Escalade or, now we've got the Lyric, which is a really, enticing electric vehicle that I think is probably going to be a home run. As long as they keep putting out good products, and execute really well on what they're trying to do, as opposed to just slapping badges around. I think that's what's going to be key. I mean, could you imagine with Porsche when they were busy building 911s, and you remember they had the 4-cylinder 914 for a long time, even though it didn't necessarily wear a Porsche badge. Everyone knew what it was. And then they had some V6 Cayennes that did 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. That's like the antithesis of what you think a Porsche is. But as long as the overall execution, the overarching strategy, as long as no one cared about the 6-cylinder Cayenne entry-level model, as long as they were making twin turbo 500-600 horsepower versions too, and that's why it was okay. But if they would just come out with a kind of ho-hum also ran SUV and just slapped a Porsche badge on it, they would have hurt their brand. They didn't do that. They made a legitimate, luxurious, high-performance SUV, and everyone got over it because the product itself was good.
Yeah, if the product's good, like winning cures all here. I think, it won't be a problem. If these are good things, people will be excited, and that will be it, really. So let's talk about perhaps maybe the weakest link here, the Camaro. Mm-hmm. The car I actually think the product itself has been pretty solid in recent years, but I think it's struggled to really hold its own against the Challenger, which just people seem to be like grabbing those up. It's like selling a ton of cars. It's been helped by having all-wheel drive, and then it's a little bit of a larger car. I think it's a little ironic given that it's the only of sort of the Detroit 3 pony cars that actually has in-house competition. Like for all the people who are like, well, I want the Challenger because it's bigger. Well, there's also the Charger, mm-hmm. So one of its key selling points is also just, hey, it's also in some ways a detriment or something to its business model. So all that being said, the Camaro it sounds like it's going to continue. For a while, it was very unclear even what they were going to do with it next. In its current form, it's, high-powered, great chassis, mm-hmm. Mediocre interior, some compromises with the driving experience. It's tough to see out of the thing. And the interior, like I said, ain't great. But it's a fun car. It looks good. But they're not selling a ton of them.
Yeah.
At least compared to its rivals. So what we're hearing is an electric 2+2 for starters, which to me makes a ton of sense. Mm-hmm. Do like what Tesla did with the Roadster, electrify the thing. You've got an existing footprint that people like, and I think that gives it new life. Mm-hmm. Like Tesla grabbed the Lotus and made the Roadster. So I don't think there's any controversy there. The question is, what about this sort of crossover-like thing that is much more nebulous? Jonathan Ramsey, who wrote up our version of the story, compared it to sort of kind of almost cannibalizing the Blazer. And I've long made this argument, probably almost as long as you've made the Escalade argument, is that the Blazer looks as much about the Camaro, as much like the Camaro, as the Mach-E looks like a Mustang. Mm-hmm. They could have called that thing a Camaro, and I think it looks the part, or at least close enough. They could have leaned into it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But all that is to say, I think the Blazer looks pretty sporty. And, I'm curious what this will be, because we already know there's going to be an electric Equinox and Blazer.
Right.
So it's not like they're going to kill off the Blazer and make an electric Camaro. But perhaps there's a performance sort of like threshold, a different buyer they could reach with this like product that sounds like is on the way.
Yeah. Camaro is an interesting problem within General Motors. And I say problem sort of tongue in cheek. Because
I agree with you.
Really, the only problem is in its sales. Like, there's nothing wrong with the Camaro. If you picked that car up and parked it next to a Mustang and a Challenger and wanted to set a fast lap, like comparable models, you took the SS against the Mustang GT, you take the 1LE against whatever. The Camaro is the best one to drive on a racetrack. Its chassis dynamics are impeccably well done. The powertrain, it's power everywhere right when you want it. Like, you're going to set a good driver is going to set the fastest lap in the Camaro. over its two rivals, but it sells the least. So what does that tell you? It's not all about performance anymore. There was a time probably in the 1980s where the American companies were just rebounding from the, decade and a half of really disappointing performance numbers. And the Mustang and Camaro went back and forth, one-upping each other. Like, oh, this one's 0.2 of a second quicker to 60. It's the one you want. Ford's able to offer a manual transmission with their most powerful, most potent engine, and GM isn't. Okay, that swings it in the Mustang's favor. And it was all about bragging rights back then. I just don't think it is anymore. I don't think people are buying, they're buying Mustangs instead of Camaros for a lot more than the 0 to 60 or track time. And look at the Challenger. The Challenger at this point, it cannot hold a candle to the Camaro on a racetrack, like where you'd expect that, like a sporty looking car is going to do its best business, unless that racetrack is a quarter mile long and straight as an arrow. That's what the Challenger is now. It's a drag racing car. People are responding really well to that. They really like it. And I don't think it's about raw numbers anymore. I think it's about like what the car, how the car makes you feel, what you think it represents, in an age where they're all doing 0 to 60 in, the 4-second range or 5-second range, depending on which one you get. Does it really matter anymore, which one wins the stoplight drag race? I think people are voting with their pocketbooks that no, that's not really what it's all about to them. They buy Challengers because they like the muscle car look. They like to feel like they're driving a muscle car. They buy Mustangs because it's the quintessential American sports car, like pony car. The Camaro might outperform it, but it certainly doesn't outperform it in the dealership where they're, where the bottom line is what matters most. So I think we should be happy that General Motors top people are looking at Camaro and saying, okay, we've done this thing, like we've hit the apogee of how we're going to make internal combustion performance out of the Camaro line. If we want to keep building Camaros, we have to rethink this. They need to rethink it just to take over the sales lead, but in the process, or even just make good sales. Like their sales are pretty pathetic despite how good of a car it is at its heart. So it needs to be redone in this age of electrification and age of electric performance. They absolutely should go down that route with it. I for one, am happy that to hear that the Camaro just isn't getting axed and killed as a concept, period, because that has happened before. So, if it takes the form of a Mach-E competitor, great, love it. Now we've got a whole new comparison test, or which one of these should I buy? We have a lot more conversations to have on these podcasts for as long as General Motors is keeping the Camaro name alive. So, that's the one that's the most surprising to me because, I don't think people think of like Camaro, like the nameplate, like they think of Mustang in the same, in the same exact way. Like Mustang means a little bit more, I would argue. And if you're a major GM fan, and you disagree with me, that's totally fine. You're welcome to that take. But, I think when it comes to heritage, we just have to be okay with like the new normal, the shifting of tastes, let's just be happy that it's still a thing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in every situation you have to define victory. And if Chevy and General Motors were sort of willing to accept the Camaro sales, maybe a diminished, more niche position, but the car was how they wanted it, I think you could make that case. But I don't think that's what they want to do. And I think the crossover is sort of as described, makes a ton of sense. Like a Mach-E fighter, Porsche Macan fighter, maybe a, lesser, lower rent type of that could be a lot of fun. My only surprise there is just that they already have the Equinox, the Blazer, and then electric versions of them. So, wow, we're going to have a third one from Chevy. But, I mean, okay, sure, I'll buy that. Then we get to, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, keep in mind that these are all going to be built on a similar platform. So, like they could put a bigger electric motor in it to make it quicker, and a stiffer suspension, and slightly change the body work, or cut 2 inches off the wheelbase. It doesn't. I'm sure they're all going to be based on similar guts and bones and tech underneath, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point too. I'm glad I almost didn't cut you off there, because what General Motors is really winning, they're generally being very aggressive. Like they never worried about having Pontiac and Buick and Oldsmobile compete with Chevy. More was more. So having more like Chevy crossovers is, that's like their historic strategy, is flood the zone and let the consumer, figure it out. So I think it could definitely work. And then we just move on to this mid-priced flagship sports car linked to Corvette. And Jonathan wrote that he thought it sounded Pontiac-esque, just because, you're moving like up a little bit in price. I would say, okay, that makes sense. But also Pontiac sports cars generally were genetically like related more to the Camaro, historically. The Corvette didn't generally jump in there unless there's some chapter of, history that I don't know about. So to me, it's kind of like, I can almost see if you made this like a Cadillac argument. We're going to have something that's related to the Corvette, which they did, the XLR. But do you need two Chevy sports cars? I don't know. Maybe you do. What do you think? To me, I just wrote down WTF and didn't really go much farther with that.
The only way it makes sense to me, because just the way that it's worded, like what does mid-price flagship mean? Flagship usually means the most expensive, and then mid-price means something lower than flagship. So the way that that's written, there's so many ways that you could interpret that. I'll just tell you what I would personally like to see if it were me. I would like to see the Corvette, now here's the caveat there. You could call the Corvette a mid-price flagship when you compare it with its peers. If you're cross-shopping the Corvette and the Porsche 911, the 911 is comparable in performance. They've gone back for years and years, doing comparison tests between 911s and Corvettes, and Corvette wins as often as it loses. So if that's the case, and they want to maintain Corvette like in that spot where it's got like where it currently thrives, we offer all of the performance and heritage of something with a Porsche badge or a BMW or Mercedes badge, but we do it in this uniquely American way with a much lower price. If they just want to keep that like kind of spot in the marketplace, then they should keep the Corvette as it is with its like their halo and the ZR1 and the Z06 with the Z07 package or whatever. Like keep that as it is. Make a four-door sports car that will compete against things like Panameras and Taycans and Tesla Model S's and all these really high-end, high-performance electric vehicles that are like really desirable to people. Make a Corvette that competes with those and does it in a similar way. Like, okay, so the range-topping Tesla Model S Plaid is, what is it, $150,000, $170,000? I don't even know anymore. Tesla changes their pricing so often. If they could do Tesla Model S mimicking performance with a Corvette badge for, say, $110,000 or $115,000, that's awesome. That is worthy of the Corvette badge to me. So that's how I hope that they're looking at it.
Yeah, to me, this is, I guess, since it's our last one, this is maybe the one. I don't want to say, no, I don't want another sports car, but this might be the one where I'd say, if you're not going to do one, it makes the least amount of sense to me on this list. Because if a Corvette starts at like 64 currently, and in a couple of years, you add electrification, prices are going to be different. But let's just say whatever the numbers are, the levels, sort of hold true. I mean, what does this mean? You're getting like a $55,000, sort of Camaro thing that's priced above some Camaros, but below Corvettes, but it's the flagship. I don't know. It could even simply be just like a Camaro Z06. That's what it could be. I mean, if you go back and look at like what was a slightly more expensive Camaro that stepped a little bit on some of the basic Corvettes, could be something like that, or a ZL1. Maybe we're overthinking it. Camaro historically has had things like this, but yeah, that's the lineup, man. That's a lot of iconic models that could be brands.
Yeah, I mean, if I were sitting in a GM product think tank group, I would tell them, I think these are great ideas to take these names that mean something to people, expand on the Escalade, but keep it keep it in the utility vehicle space, expand on Camaro and make it your mid-level like performance but attainable. Keep Corvette its kind of range topping in the General Motors portfolio, but spread the wealth around. Multiple size Escalades that are all good products. Multiple versions of Camaros. Like maybe you've got the 2-door sports car still. Maybe you've got the 4-door crossover. But make them. Again, we've hit on this. Make sure they're good products, and make a couple Corvettes. Like let's just call all of the 2-door coupes. Let's call them Stingrays now. Like it's the Corvette Stingray, and then there's also the Corvette sedan has another name to it. But as long as it's a really great product, as long as it still hits the benchmarks and is great to drive, I'm okay with all that. That's what I would tell them.
Sounds good. I'm sure they'll have you on speed dial, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The consultant. There you go. All right. So we will wrap up our news section here with just a little bit of the end of AM radio in cars is perhaps at hand. I've driven a few press cars recently that haven't had it, and I find it frustrating just because AM radio is usually how you can get traffic and weather like the quickest. You don't have to figure out what the satellite channel is or figure out which app has it. So, I mean, maybe it had. The reason being, one of the reasons is that it's tricky to sort of work with some electric vehicle setups. That's one of the reasons. Senator Ed Markey out of Massachusetts has come up with a letter that came out recently saying, hey, there's some safety concerns here. There's like accessibility. Automakers, please rethink this. So, I don't know. For what it's worth, I think it's like you should keep AM radio. Like it's been around for like 100 years. Find a way to keep that in cars. It's accessible for a lot of people. I know you can sort of simulcast, get AM radio stations different ways. It's not that big a deal for people who know what they're doing and have sort of the nice enough cars. But, I think I tend to agree with the senator here. I think it's just car companies should find a way to try to make this work. What do you think?
I'm just gonna say it. I don't care. I really don't. I haven't listened to an AM radio station in as long as I can remember, in the same way that, cassettes are no longer a thing and they replaced 8-tracks, but then CDs replaced cassettes, and now all of our music is either streamed or on our phones or whatever. I don't really need AM or FM in my own personal car. So I'm the wrong person to ask here. I really, really don't care personally. I have a couple thoughts on the reasoning behind it though. I don't understand how picking up and receiving and decoding AM wavelengths, whatever those wavelengths are, maybe I'm just not smart enough and I don't understand how it all works, and it's probably the case. But the frequencies are already bouncing everywhere off on the airwaves, right? Just because the car doesn't decode that signal and play it through the speakers, I don't get the argument that it somehow messes up, the electric drivetrain of vehicles. It literally if that's true, I need someone to sit down and explain it to me. At face value, I'm not buying that. I'm wondering if it's just we don't want to do this anymore, and we're saying like, oh well, it kind of messes with our electric car drivetrains, and it as proof of that question. I guess I don't want to say proof and question. As proof of my point, I would, Exhibit A. Some electric cars that are currently on the road do still have AM. There's a bunch of them that, like, I read the story and I don't have it sitting in front of me, so I don't remember, but what it's like, Mercedes still has it, but BMW doesn't, or something like that. And that was the reasoning they came up with. Well, how come they were able to figure it out and you weren't, would be my question, and also, how many electric motors and batteries are in every single car that has been built in, for as long as I can remember? How is this possible that these, frequencies that are nebulously floating all over planet Earth are somehow a problem for this? I'm not sure that I buy it. But, again, maybe I'm just not smart enough to understand. Certainly possible. But yeah, my personal viewpoint is I don't really care if AM goes away. It's immaterial to me in my own daily life, but I don't buy the reasoning behind it going away. So if people want it, I would say, let them have it. I really don't think it's breaking your car, personally.
All right, you heard it here first. Jeremy does not care about the demise of AM radio. Video killed the radio star. Jeremy apparently killed AM radio, although if it's electric cars, maybe Elon Musk killed AM radio. Probably not. Probably not.
No, that sounds like an upcoming movie, Greg.
Indeed. Yeah, there you go, right? All right, so how about we talk more about what's actually hitting your life? Tell me about this Lexus that's been in your driveway somewhat recently.
Well, I can barely even believe that it's still a thing, the Lexus GX. It's been on the road in its current state since 2010. It is 2022, and there's going to be a 2023. So you can actually still go out and buy one of these things. I would say, and I'll also say very few changes. Not a whole lot is different. They did an exterior refresh in 2013 or 14? I think it was maybe the 14 model year, but it came out in 2013. That's where they got the big ugly spindle grille, as opposed to the more attractive original version. They redid the interior just a little bit, but it's still real chunky and old school. And I guess I'll put it this way. I don't think they're going to be able to keep that up that much longer. So if what you want is a deadpan reliable, like old school SUV that gets terrible gas mileage, but is just honest for what it is, then go out and buy your GX now, because I doubt that this thing's going to be able to keep on, limping along much further.
Okay. All right. Did you do anything fun with it?
I just realized it sounds like I'm really knocking the GX, and I don't mean to. I just don't think that they're going to be able to keep this, this 15 mile per gallon, gas with guzzling SUV around in its current state. I enjoy it. I really like driving it. Like, if you listen to this podcast regularly, you'll know that I used to own a Lexus GX, similar to this. Like, it was one of the earlier model years, but this generation. I currently drive a 1993 GMC Suburban 2500 4x4. I am not against old school SUVs. I'll put it that way. The last 4 vehicles I bought with my own money were old school SUVs. It's shocking to me that it is still a thing, is the point that I was trying to make. And I don't think they're going to be able to keep it that way. I drove it on, the highway quite a bit. I wanted to see if there were any improvements at all to, the platform or the powertrain, and there aren't. It's the same GX as it's been for, a decade. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it is what it is. It's a known quantity. So yeah, I just drove it as a normal owner would. I put a couple hours on it, on the expressway. And it's comforting and comfortable. But yeah, I didn't do any off-roading or, any pulling up to fancy restaurants and having it valet parked to see where they put it. I didn't do anything fun with it like that. But just kind of use it as a family SUV for the week.
Okay. Sounds, pretty fun in some ways, but I hear you. Let's transition over to the BMW 330e. This is our long-termer. I mentioned it last week. Another quick update here. I filled it up for the first time. I've had it for about 10 days now. Road test editor Zach Palmer dropped it off. The tank was probably in hindsight about like maybe 80% full. I thought it was totally full, but I think it was more like 80%. And I've been charging it sort of intermittently throughout my time with it. I would say this, it was a little annoying to have to put almost $40 worth of fuel into this thing like a week after getting it. And Zach also lays out the argument for why in one of his posts about, 8-9 months ago at this point. The fuel tank is relatively small because it's a plug-in hybrid. So those batteries have to go somewhere. So once you exhaust the roughly 21 miles of electric range, you could drive the car at like over 80 miles an hour. So you could go electric for a little bit. But once you've done that, you're really burning through some premium fuel pretty quickly. So I found that to be frustrating a little bit. And I'll say this, like in cold weather, it's really easy to nuke that electric range real quick. Like I use the charger that comes with the car. I plug it into my garage. I just plugged it in, wanted to kind of top it off before I run out here towards the end of the day and do some errands. It's like it literally goes from like anything less than 10 miles of range, you might as well just not have it because it just dissipates really quickly. And again, it's like 30 degrees here. I get that. So then there's that. And that's okay. As I said last week, I feel like it should have been more like a 30-mile threshold versus 20. But, at that point, then you're just lugging around a bunch of batteries with a 4-cylinder turbo and, fuel economy and range take a bit of a hit there, Like I already was just looking at it. I'm like, okay, it's 212 miles. I bet you that's going to be under 200 by the time I'm done running errands. And I don't think I'm going to drive 12 miles per se. I'll admit some of it's the weather, the time of the year. There's a lot of traffic. People are holiday shopping. But I've just found it's been a little less efficient, a little bit less of like a commuting hack that I would have hoped. I think if I had a home charger, I could top it off quicker and that would solve my problem. But the counter argument to that, I think, is would you buy a home charger for a car that gives you 20 miles of range? Is that really worth it to you? Maybe, maybe not. So I realize this isn't the most like cogent argument. I'm a little all over the place, but I think that's like I've been with the car for a week. I'm just trying to figure it out. And I'm literally speaking to you, my Autoblog podcast listener friends and Jeremy, like it's a stream of consciousness. If I had a couple drinks in me, I'd say, I don't really know how I feel about this yet. The good side, and I've laid this out before, it's a very nice 3 Series. Drives very well. It's planted. I think the batteries probably help in that front a little bit. Steering's good. I think it looks pretty good. Interior with those orange light pipes and kind of brownish, like kind of horsehide sort of color, like seats. Very lovely car. And, to bring this all together here, the 3 Series, particularly this one, is actually one of the more balanced, like sort of sporty intending sedans you could get. It's not as severe as, say, a CT4 or Alfa Romeo Giulia or some of the Lexuses. It's, it's somewhat comfortable, but it's also sportier than some of the other just sedans out there. So I would just say, I guess the headline here is I spent a little over $39 filling it up, and I'm still trying to figure out the best way to make the most out of my charge with it. So that's where I'm landing.
Yeah, I hear you. The plug-in hybrids they're a little bit of a conundrum. If someone were to, there's 2 ways to look at it. If someone were to ask me what the most perfect arrangement right now with the way that our infrastructure is, the most perfect arrangement for a powertrain, I would probably say, well, a plug-in hybrid. It covers all the bases. You know, you get your electric in the city, you get your, your fossil fuels on the highway. You're never going to be left stranded. If you were asking me on a technical side, I would say, well, it's the worst because now you've got two powertrains. You've got an electric motor and battery and all the associated gear for that, but you still got an engine. One of them is lugging around the other one all the time. You know, there's a lot of arguments against it, and there's a lot of really good livability arguments for it. Here's the thing where, like, there's two words: compromise and balance. There's going to be a compromise somewhere. It's either going to have a really big battery and be too expensive, or it's going to have a battery that you wish was a little bit bigger, but at least it fits the pocketbook. And that's where we are right now. You can't build a car with an engine, especially a turbocharged, it's not the least complicated engine in the world. You can't build a car with an engine and a motor, each of them powerful enough to haul the other one around, still be efficient with a big battery and a huge gas tank. And for a price that you're gonna not raise your eyebrow at. A couple weeks ago, we had this conversation because I had been driving around the Lexus NX 450H Plus, and it gets over 30 miles of range, but it's $15,000 more expensive than its non-plug-in, sibling in the same dealership. And I said, well, that's just too much money for what you're getting. But it got you the electric range that you want. Well, the BMW, Zach mentioned as a counter argument, well, that one makes perfect sense because they were able to price it really, aggressively compared to some of the other BMW 3 Series models that you might be comparing it against. It's not like this huge, $10,000, $15,000 price upgrade. Well, I bet you if they put a battery that got you 35 or 40 miles, well, there's that several $1,000s extra that we'd then be pointing a finger at them and saying, well, you got to do it cheaper. So, it's going to be compromise. Balance is what I mean when I say pick the one that's right for your family. If you want to use this car on long road trips, it's not your best option because you're not going to get very far in between gas stops. If you really just want to use it as your daily driver around town, sure, you're going to end up filling it up a little bit more often, but the total dollar amount of your fill-ups is going to, at the end of the year, it's going to equal the same amount. You're just doing it more often. And if, 21 whatever miles it is, those are the most efficient miles that you're going to have. So, if the balance that it offers fits what you need out of a car, it's a pretty good one, right? We like the way it drives. We like the way it looks. We think it's priced well. It's just, is that balance right for every consumer? Certainly not. And the same thing with the Lexus NX that I was talking about. If its compromises fall in the side where it fits the balance of your life, then maybe it is worth the extra money. So plug-in hybrids are just a weird conundrum right now. And I think that they're honestly necessary until the electric charging infrastructure is good enough that it works for everybody. So yeah, it's another one of those, kind of difficult things to hit all of the specs that you want and being able to do it at a price that you can afford.
I think if your office or your house, maybe you already have an EV, if you have a level 2 charger, I think this can make sense. It's where you have to kind of like if this were your only car, if you will, that's where I'm finding myself seeking out the infrastructure, which is the problem. It's interesting too. I've heard the argument for and against plug-in hybrids and kind of feeling it a little bit. It's literally in my face. I get it, in a way that maybe I didn't before. It's one of those things where it's yeah, I get credit for trying, but I also am maybe they could have tried a little harder, because you do see some of these plugins and it's like, why did they even do this? That's not really the case with this car.
Yeah, it's good.
I just feel like, okay, so.
Well, one other thing to think about is some people have charging available to them at the place that they park. Whether it's a parking garage, a place of work, a hospital, who knows wherever it is.
Yeah.
Some of the shopping complexes here around me in Columbus have free charging if you're frequenting their restaurants or shopping centers or whatever. That could really save you some money, and make the argument, like, swing the pendulum just a little bit further in the direction of the plug-in for you. That's kind of like the point that I was trying to make. Like, look at what your options are, and if this is the one that suits you, it's actually a pretty good car, right? Like, we like pretty much everything about it. The gas tank should be bigger. That's an issue. Like, I wish that they could have, carved out some space somewhere for a few more gallons of gas. I think that's the biggest knock that I would have on it. If they could get it up to like 300 miles a tank as opposed to 212 or whatever, 220, whatever you said, I think that would kind of alleviate that irritation factor. My Lexus GX only got 300 something miles to a tank because it got terrible gas mileage. So, at least it would take that, like, irritation out of it. Yep.
No, I hear you. And again, I'm not trying to make an argument about, do you need a charger? Is the infrastructure good or bad? I mean, the answer is yes, in some form to all of that.
Yeah.
But I think I'm using it how a lot of people would use it. You might or might not decide you want to go with an in-home charger with this specific car.
Yeah.
And it can be frustrating because you don't feel like you should be filling up a plug-in hybrid weekly, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's where you're kind of like, okay.
Either the battery's not big enough or the gas tank's not big enough. One of those things is a problem. As they're currently sized, they both seem a little bit irritating.
Check out Zach's story. It's from actually last April when he was doing sort of some range testing and different things. Some of the numbers are actually okay, but just in my real world experience, doesn't last as long as you might think.
Especially in 30-degree weather, right?
Yeah, but it's going to be cold. It's going to be 30 degrees a lot of places, right?
That's an honest fact of life for a lot of us.
How about we spend some money?
Oh, let's spend some money.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. So this comes from, every now and then we'll dip into what's going on the Our Cars thread on Reddit. A Reddit user from Boston, Massachusetts, that's 2 Massachusetts references in this podcast, is looking for something, max range $50,000. Not wanting to go over $500 a month in payment, looking to buy, not lease. Something new, looking for a sedan. Must-haves are backup cameras. So if you get a new car, that's going to be on basically everything. Good suspension, fuel efficiency. I'm going to sort of ignore that with my pick, so it goes. And good infotainment involving Android Auto. So, I'm going to kind of pick and choose here how I want to approach this, to be honest, because it's more of like a generic one that we're cherry picking, but I would look at a Cadillac CT5.
Yeah.
I think it's you can get one under 50 grand. I like how they look a lot, actually. The 3-liter twin turbo V6 with the 10-speed automatic, that starts at $47,590. That's the MSRP. Add in some destination and stuff, and I think you're going to get up to 50 pretty quick. If you want to get a little bit better fuel economy, well, hey, there's the 2-liter twin scroll turbocharged 4-banger, and that'll be like well under 50. At that point, your MSRP is 44. So, that's what I would do. I think there's a lot of different things you can get at that price point. I wouldn't discount a 3 Series, frankly. If you own a Tesla and you want to get a hybrid, well, hey, like I just said, the 3 Series could be right for you in that case. Alfa Romeo Giulia, that's the driver's car. Struggle to necessarily recommend that as like a long-term option.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I would look at as far as like a 4-door that's going to be fun to drive in that segment, and I think is priced right too. Now you can look at like a C-Class, that's going to do a lot for you. That's certainly out there as well. Like I said, a 3 Series is on the table. And that's if you want to go luxury. My other option would be if you want just like a value four-door, I mean, I don't know, see how much Dodge Charger you could get in its final year here. So those are my answers. Over to you, sir.
I like your answers there. I think you've covered a lot of good options. I would go one of three ways. If I wanted kind of to throw caution to the wind and get something fun, I'd get a Charger. It's probably the final model year. It's a really fun car, and I don't think. I think it's kind of like the end of an era, and it's an era that I've enjoyed. So I really do like the Charger. It's probably not what I would recommend to other people because I think, it's probably not the right choice for a huge swath of the population. But if it is like something that intrigues you, I definitely would try going that route. I'm going to give two answers. I'm going to say buy a really nice Honda Accord and keep the rest of your money in your pocket, save a little bit. Or I would consider a Lexus ES 300H sedan. It's the current TNGA, Camry, ES, Avalon, all those largish Toyota, Lexus sedans. They're not what they used to be. They're actually tight. They drive well. They've got good suspension. They've got pretty good handling, like unexpectedly so from, what you expect historically out of Toyota Lexus. Excellent fuel efficiency. They're not the quickest things in the world, but the electric motors make them feel quick around town. Like they pull really well. Quiet as all get out. Lexus infotainment has never been my favorite, but you're talking about using Android Auto. So you got a nice big screen to look at it on. The ES300 hybrid is really nice. And it's definitely something that I would recommend to people to check out. Or, if kind of the anodyne driving experience, even though it's much more fun than it used to be, if that's just really not your thing, the Honda Accord is an excellent car. In its current generation, and I like what I've seen out of the new one that is about to hit dealerships this upcoming year. You could get the nicest Accord on the planet, or you could just pick a mid-range model that's got the options that you want and pocket the rest of your money. And I don't think you'd be mad about that decision. Yeah,
that's actually a very interesting one. Just doing some different Googling, I kind of came across that, then kind of kept going. But you lay out a good case for it. I mean, I agree with you. That's definitely a good option. A little bit of a different meat, as opposed to my meat and potatoes take. Yours is a little more, frankly, nuanced and reasonable.
Well, I mean, like I said, I'd march in a Dodge dealership and look at a Charger. Would I recommend that everyone do that? No, probably not.
Yeah, fair enough.
Probably not. If I wanted to spend $50,000 and I wanted to get the nicest sedan I could for that, it'd be the Lexus ES hybrid.
Sounds good. Well, that's all the time we have this week. Give you a quick holiday beer recommendation, Jeremy. It looks like you're wearing a brewery hat, I think.
I certainly am. Rheingeist.
What are you drinking in December here?
I'm actually brewing.
Oh yes, that's right.
I got a new brewing kit, 10-gallon all stainless steel, all grain brewing. 15 gallons worth of wort, 10 gallons worth of finished product into the fermenter. So I've got that going on. What is currently in my refrigerator right now is some Yingling Black and Tans. It's not like a go-to of mine, but I was walking through the grocery store beer aisle the other day, and nothing was jumping out at me. And I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna, until something really strikes my fantasy the next time I'm shopping, I'm just gonna get a 12-pack of these. They're, easy drinking but not light. So that's what I've got in the fridge right now.
It's funny, don't you hate when that happens? You're in the beer aisle, especially maybe one of more upscale grocery stores where they have that nice selection. You're like, well, geez, I don't know what I want. So I did the same thing. I have a Heineken 6-pack, a holiday 6-pack, holiday 5-pack. I am working my way through it, and I think Heineken and Stella Artois. I mean, I buy the marketing. Stella has those ads with the old Citroën in them, or maybe they're Peugeots. I think they're Citroens. Like,
I don't remember.
it's good kind of beer to drink.
Oh, I like Stella. Yeah, I don't drink a lot of Heineken, but I'm a Stella fan. It's like a classic European beer.
Yeah.
Like I'll never drink a Budweiser. Well, it's not never. There's someone gives me one, I'm going to drink it, but I never buy things like Budweiser or Coors Light or anything like that. But Stella, absolutely.
Definitely. It's the first time I had it was in Montreal, actually, which is probably about as close to Europe as you could get in North America. I could really go for a Stella right about now, to be honest.
No one's stopping you, Greg.
Indeed. That's all the time we have this week. If you enjoy the show, please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you get the Autoblog Podcast. Send us your Spend My Monies. That's podcast@autoblog.com. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next week.